My ex's parents came into my apartment uninvited, mocked my furniture, and threw a ripped $10 check in my face while claiming I made everything up. When I asked them why they were doing this, my mother-in-law smiled and said, "Because lies always fall apart, eventually yours just happened faster." I just stood there. That was 3 weeks ago. Yesterday, she dropped her phone during his call and hasn't picked it back up since. I was home alone when my ex-husband's parents knocked on my door with triumphant smiles. "Good news! The judge finally saw through your BS," my father-in-law exclaimed. I furrowed my eyebrows because Tyrone had been thrown in jail earlier that day. 8 to 12 years for wording me at gunpoint, $2.3 million in damages. I instantly knew that their son had lied to them and told them that he won, and now they were here to gloat. My mother-in-law pushed past me without waiting for an invitation, and the way she moved through my space like she owned it made my skin crawl. I stumbled backward, catching myself on the wall. My father-in-law followed, and they both settled onto my couch like they belonged there. I hadn't even closed the door yet. My mother-in-law's eyes landed on my law book scattered across the coffee table, and she picked one up just to drop it back down with this theatrical disgust that made me want to scream. "Still playing lawyer?" she said, her voice dripping with fake pity. "You should know by now. Justice won. The truth won." The irony of her words nearly made me laugh out loud. I finally shut the door and took a few steps into my own living room, keeping the coffee table between us. My father-in-law was already doing this slow survey of my apartment, his raised eyebrows cataloging every secondhand piece of furniture, every bare wall. I forced myself to keep smiling, gripping the back of a chair for support. Things escalated when she pulled out her phone and shoved it in my face. Tyrone's social media showed him with a new woman. Look at him now, free and happy with a real woman who knows how to please a man, not make up stories. The words hit exactly where she'd aimed them. My mother-in-law patted my hand like I was a confused child. I pulled my hand back instinctively, tucking it against my stomach. "The judge saw right through you, dear. Everyone did. Maybe now you can get the help you need." I moved to the kitchen, needing distance. The financial humiliation started when my mother-in-law followed me and opened my refrigerator without asking. I stepped aside, pressed against the counter. She made this whole performance of seeing it empty. My stomach churned as I watched my father-in-law pull out his checkbook with this exaggerated flourish. He wrote out a check for $10, $10 effing dollars, and placed it on my coffee table like he was doing me some massive favor. "Take it. We know your lawyers abandoned you after they realized you were lying." He chuckled while writing the check, shook his head at wasted money. My mother-in-law opened my mail on the counter, fake a look of concern. I reached for the papers, but she moved them away, still reading. My father-in-law looked at my son's artwork on the fridge. "Where is he anyway?" "Actually, don't worry. The court records will help us get custody." I watched in horror as my mother-in-law walked to the mantel and actually turned my child's photo away from where I sit every evening. I took 2 quick steps toward her but stopped myself before I did something I'd regret. Then she pulled down the Mother's Day card my son had made me, crumpling it slightly before smoothing it out with mock care. My fists clenched so hard my nails left marks in my palms. "Our lawyer says with the case dismissed, proving you're an unfit mother will be easy. False accusations? That's parental alienation." I backed up until I hit the wall. The final degradation came when my father-in-law stood up and towered his 6'5" self over me. The power play was so obvious it would have been pathetic if it wasn't terrifying. Then my mother-in-law did something that shocked me even after everything else. She spit on my carpet near my feet. Actually spit. Like I was so beneath her that she needed to mark her territory. They headed for the door, but my mother-in-law turned back and grabbed that $10 check. She tore it into pieces with this vicious smile that made her look exactly like her son had during the trial. Then she threw the pieces at my face like confetti. I flinched as they hit me. They stuck in my hair as my father-in-law leaned down close enough that I could smell his cologne mixed with pure hatred. I pressed myself deeper into the chair. "The case is over. You lost. You're nothing but a lying W-word who tried to ruin a good man." My mother-in-law added, "Stay away from our family, or we'll use the court transcripts to get a restraining order." Right as they reached for the door handle, her phone rang. She answered on speaker. My hands shook as an automated voice filled my apartment. "This is a call from the correctional facility." Then Tyrone's voice cracked through the speaker, broken and desperate. "Mom? Dad? Please don't hang up. I've been incarcerated since this morning. I'm so sorry. I couldn't tell you. I couldn't bear for you to see me like this." His parents heard their son sob through the speaker about his guilty verdict, about the 8 years he'd be serving, about how sorry he was for lying to them. My father-in-law's legs gave out completely and he collapsed against the doorframe. My mother-in-law reached for me with trembling hands, tears streaming down her face. "Please, I'm so sorry." We believed him. I stood frozen as they stumbled out of my apartment, the door slamming behind them with a finality that echoed through my bones. My legs gave out and I slid down the wall until I hit the floor. The torn pieces of that check scattered around me like fallen leaves, and I picked one up with trembling fingers. $10. They'd tried to humiliate me with $10 while their son owed me millions. The silence in my apartment felt heavy, pressing down on me from all sides. I crawled to the couch and pulled myself up, my whole body shaking. The law books they'd touched felt contaminated now. I gathered them up and held them against my chest, these symbols of the future I was fighting to build. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. Sarah, my best friend since college. I let it ring through to voicemail, not trusting my voice yet. I forced myself to stand and walk to the kitchen on unsteady legs. The refrigerator door hung open from where my mother-in-law had violated my privacy. I closed it gently, then harder, then slammed it with all my strength. The magnets holding my son's artwork rattled but stayed in place. I touched each drawing, straightening them carefully. These were sacred. These were proof that I was more than what had been done to me. My hands moved on autopilot, picking up the pieces of the torn check from the floor. Each fragment felt like a small victory as I dropped them in the trash. I found the one stuck in my hair and pulled it free, a bitter laugh escaping my throat. They'd thrown money in my face like I was nothing, and now their son would spend years behind bars while I rebuilt everything he'd tried to destroy. The Mother's Day card on the mantel had been moved, crumpled at the edges where she'd grabbed it. I smoothed it out with infinite care, reading my son's crooked hand handwriting. "I love you, Mommy. You are the best." The words blurred as tears finally came. I held the card against my heart and let myself cry for the first time since the trial ended. Not tears of defeat, but of relief. They knew now. They finally knew what their son really was. My phone buzzed again. This time it was my lawyer. I answered on the second ring, my voice steadier than I expected. She wanted to discuss the payment plan for the damages, how to ensure I actually received something from the judgment. I took notes on the back of an envelope, my hand gradually stopping its shaking as we talked through the logistics. 2.3 million. Even if I only saw a fraction of it, it would change everything for my son and me. After hanging up, I walked through my apartment like I was seeing it for the first time. Yes, the furniture was secondhand. Yes, the walls were bare. But this was my sanctuary, the place I'd rebuilt myself after everything fell apart. I touched the lock on the door, remembering how I'd had it changed 3 times after Tyrone was arrested. This was my space, mine. I picked up my son's photo from where it had been turned away and positioned it back exactly where it belonged. His gap-toothed smile beamed at me, and I smiled back through drying tears. Tomorrow, I would see him at my mother's house. Tomorrow, I would hug him and help with his homework and make his favorite dinner. Tomorrow, I would continue being the mother he deserved, not the broken victim his grandparents had tried to paint me as. The automated message from the correctional facility played over and over in my mind, the shock in their voices, the way my father-in-law's legs had given out, the desperate tears streaming down my mother-in-law's face. They'd walked into my home so sure of their son's lies, so ready to destroy me further. Instead, they'd learned the truth in the most brutal way possible. I felt no satisfaction in their pain, just a hollow kind of vindication. I pulled out my laptop and opened the document where I'd been keeping a record of everything since the assault. Every threat, every interaction, every small victory. I typed out every detail of what had just happened while it was fresh. The $10 check, the spitting, the threats about custody. My lawyer had taught me to document everything, and this would be no exception. If they tried to follow through on any of their threats, I would be ready. My reflection in the laptop screen looked haggard but unbroken. I straightened my shoulders and kept typing. The woman staring back at me had survived the worst night of her life, testified in court while her attacker glared at her, and watched justice finally be served. She could survive his parents' misguided rage too. The apartment felt different now, like their presence had shifted something fundamental in the air. I opened every window despite the evening chill, letting fresh air sweep through the rooms. Then I lit the candle Sarah had given me after the trial, the one that smelled like vanilla and new beginnings. Talk about the worst case of shooting the messenger. Except here the messenger was literally an automated prison phone system delivering the plot twist of the century, while mom and dad were mid-victory lap in someone else's living room. The flame flickered but held steady, casting dancing shadows on the walls. I thought about calling my mother, telling her what had happened, but decided against it. She worried enough about me already. Tomorrow would be soon enough to share this latest development. Tonight, I needed to process this alone, to sit with the reality that Tyrone's parents now knew the truth. They could no longer hide behind their son's lies. They would have to face what he had done, just like I'd had to face it every day since it happened. The custody threat echoed in my mind, and I pulled up the court documents on my laptop. Everything was there in black and white. The conviction, the protective order, the judge's comments about Tyrone being a danger to others. No court would give custody to the family of a convicted violent criminal. My lawyer had assured me of that repeatedly, but I made a note to call her first thing in the morning anyway. When it came to my son, I would take no chances. I moved to the kitchen and began cleaning up the space they'd invaded, wiping down the counters where they'd touched my mail, mopping the spot where she'd spit. Each action felt like reclaiming my territory, erasing their presence from my sanctuary. The physical activity helped calm my nerves, gave my hands something to do besides shake. My neighbor knocked softly on the door, and I peered through the peephole before opening it. Mrs. Gerard from next door stood there with concern written across her weathered face. She'd heard the raised voices, she said, and wanted to make sure I was all right. I assured her I was fine, and she patted my hand gently before returning to her apartment. It was a small gesture, but it reminded me that I wasn't as alone as Tyrone's parents had tried to make me feel. I closed the door behind Mrs. Gerard and leaned against it, my heart rate finally beginning to slow. The apartment felt safer with someone else knowing what had happened, even if she didn't know the full story. I walked back to my laptop and saved the document, then emailed it to myself and my lawyer as backup. Documentation was my shield now. The next morning arrived too quickly. I dressed carefully for my shift at the bookstore, choosing clothes that made me feel strong. My hands trembled slightly as I applied concealer to the dark circles under my eyes. The mirror showed a woman who looked tired but determined. I grabbed my purse and headed out, double-checking the locks behind me. At work, I threw myself into reorganizing the fiction section, needing the mindless physical activity. My manager, Ben, noticed my distraction, but didn't push when I assured him everything was fine. The familiar smell of books and coffee from the cafe next door helped ground me. Normal life continued around me while I carried this weight. My phone vibrated in my pocket around noon, an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail, then stepped into the break room to listen. My mother-in-law's voice filled my ear, shaky and desperate. She apologized repeatedly, begging me to call her back. She needed to explain, she said. They hadn't known. They were devastated. I deleted the message and blocked the number. 3 more calls came throughout my shift from different numbers. I blocked each one after confirming they were from Tyrone's parents. My coworker Jamie noticed my repeated trips to check my phone and offered to cover the register so I could take a proper break. I accepted gratefully, stepping outside into the afternoon sun. The fresh air helped clear my head. I called my lawyer's office and left a message about the harassment starting already. Then I texted Sarah, finally ready to tell someone what had happened. She responded immediately, offering to come over after work. Having plans with a friend made the rest of my shift bearable. On my way home, I stopped at the grocery store. My refrigerator needed restocking after my mother-in-law's invasive inspection. I filled my cart with healthy foods, things that would nourish my body and help me feel in control. At the checkout, I noticed a woman who looked familiar. She quickly turned away, but I recognized her as Tyrone's cousin. My stomach tightened as I paid and left quickly. Sarah arrived arrived at my apartment with Chinese takeout and a bottle of wine. I told her everything while we ate, watching her face cycle through shock, anger, and protective fury. She helped me change my voicemail message to something generic and suggested I vary my routine for a while. Having someone strategize with me made me feel less alone. After Sarah left, I checked my mail and found an envelope with no return address. Inside was a photo of my son at his school playground, taken from a distance. My blood ran cold. On the back, someone had written, "We just want to talk." I photographed both sides of the image and the envelope, then added them to my documentation file. Sleep eluded me that night. Every noise in the building made me jump. I moved a chair in front of the door as an extra barrier and kept my phone charging beside my bed. Around 3 a.m., I gave up on sleep and started researching security cameras I could afford. My son's safety was worth any expense. The next day, I called my son's school from my car before work. I explained the situation to the principal without going into full detail. She assured me they would be extra vigilant and that no one except my mother and I were authorized for pickup. The school had protocols for these situations, she said, which both comforted and saddened me. At the bookstore, I found myself checking the windows more often than usual. Every time the door chimed, my shoulders tensed. Ben pulled me aside during a quiet moment and asked if I needed to adjust my schedule. I appreciated his concern, but insisted I needed the normalcy of work. He made sure I wasn't closing alone anymore. During my lunch break, I discovered a missed call from my mother. She was upset but trying to stay calm. Someone had called her claiming to be from my son's school, saying there was an emergency. She'd almost fallen for it before remembering the school would call her cell, not her landline. We agreed she would keep my son home from school for a few days. That afternoon, a flower delivery arrived at the bookstore. The card read, "For our daughter-in-law. We're so sorry. Please forgive us." I refused the delivery, but the driver said they were already paid for. I left them on the counter and took a photo before throwing them in the dumpster out back. Every gesture felt like another manipulation. My lawyer called back finally. She advised me to file a police report about the photo of my son. Even if they couldn't do much, it would create a paper trail. She also suggested I consider a restraining order, though that would mean more legal proceedings. I told her I'd think about it, exhausted by the thought of more court appearances. After work, I drove a different route home, checking my mirrors constantly. No one seemed to be following me, but paranoia had become my companion. In my apartment building's parking lot, I noticed a car I didn't recognize idling near the entrance. I circled the block twice before it finally left, my hands gripping the steering wheel. Inside my apartment, I found a note slipped under my door. "We know you're avoiding us. This isn't over. Family takes care of family." The handwriting looked like my father-in-law's. I photographed it and added it to my growing file. Then I called the building manager about adding extra locks to my door. Sarah came over again that evening, this time with her boyfriend Alex. He worked in security and offered to help me install cameras. We spent hours setting up a basic system that would at least cover my door and the hallway. Having their help made me feel proactive instead of just reactive. While they worked, I called my mother to check on my son. He was doing okay, though he missed school and didn't understand why he had to stay home. She'd told him I was sick and would see him soon. The lie hurt, but it was better than explaining the truth. He was too young to understand why his grandparents had become a threat. That night, I reviewed the camera footage from the past few hours. Already, it had captured my father-in-law walking past my door twice, slowing each time to look at it. The second time, he'd raised his hand as if to knock before walking away. Having evidence of his presence felt like a small victory. The next morning brought a registered letter. My hands shook as I signed for it, recognizing the return address as a law firm. Inside, I found a formal letter from Tyrone's parents' attorney. They were requesting mediation to discuss family matters, including visitation with their grandson. The audacity made my jaw drop. I forwarded the letter to my lawyer immediately. She called within an hour, her voice tight with anger. They had no legal standing for grandparent visitation given their son's conviction. This was pure intimidation. She would respond formally, but warned me they might escalate when rebuffed legally. At work, I struggled to concentrate. A customer asked for book recommendations, and I blanked completely. Jamie covered for me smoothly, suggesting titles while I restocked shelves nearby. The routine of alphabetizing helped calm my racing thoughts. I could control this small thing even when everything else felt chaotic. During my break, I sat in my car and called my mother. She reported that someone had been driving slowly past her house multiple times. She'd gotten the license plate and called the police, who said they'd increase patrols. We discussed whether I should pick up my son or if that would put him at more risk. The decision tormented me all afternoon. I wanted to hold my child, to protect him myself, but bringing him back to my apartment might put him in danger. My mother's house was more secure, with good neighbors and now police awareness. I hated that I had to make these calculations about my own son's safety. Wow, the way she's building this whole security system piece by piece is really interesting. I wonder if tracking everything with photos and documents like that actually helps her feel safer or just makes her more aware of every threat. After work, I stopped at a legal aid office Sarah had recommended. They couldn't take my case but offered resources and advice. The advocate there helped me understand my options better. She'd seen this pattern before. Family members of convicted criminals often lashed out at victims. I wasn't alone in this experience. Back home, I found my mailbox stuffed with flyers for home security companies. At first, I thought it was coincidence. Then I noticed they were all addressed to me personally, not resident. Someone was sending a message. I kept one for research and threw the rest away, adding this incident to my documentation. My camera system alerted me to movement around 8 p.m. I watched on my phone as my mother-in-law approached my door with another woman I didn't recognize. They knocked for several minutes while I sat silently inside. Finally, my mother-in-law held up a sign to the camera. "We're not going away." They left, but the threat lingered. I called Sarah, needing to hear a friendly voice. She offered to stay over, but I declined. I couldn't become dependent on others for my sense of safety. Instead, we talked while I made dinner, her chatter about work drama providing normal background noise to my evening. The building manager called to confirm the new locks would be installed tomorrow. He'd also spoken to other residents about watching for suspicious activity. Mrs. Gerard had apparently given him an earful about keeping the building safe for everyone. everyone. Community support appeared in unexpected ways. That night, I lay in bed planning. I couldn't keep living in fear, jumping at shadows. I needed to be strategic. I pulled out a notebook and started listing their tactics so far. Photos, calls, letters, flowers, showing up at my door. What would come next? How could I prepare? My phone rang at 2 a.m. The caller ID showed my mother's number. I answered in a panic, but it was silent except for breathing. Then my father-in-law's voice, "You can't keep him from us forever." The line went dead. They'd spoofed her number somehow. I screenshot the call log and tried to calm my racing heart. Unable to sleep again, I researched spoofing technology and how to protect against it. I changed my phone settings to silence unknown numbers. Then I texted my mother with a code word we'd use to verify real calls. The sun was rising by the time I finally felt prepared enough to rest. The locksmith arrived early, and I took a sick day to be there for the installation. He added 2 deadbolts and a chain lock, plus reinforced the door frame. As he worked, he mentioned seeing a man watching from a car outside. I looked out to see my father-in-law's car parked across the street. I took photos of his car and license plate from my window. He saw me and waved mockingly. The locksmith finished quickly, seeming to understand the situation without my explaining. He gave me his direct number in case I needed emergency lock services, another unexpected ally. With my new locks installed, I felt marginally safer. I spent the day deep cleaning my apartment, needing to reclaim every space they'd violated with their presence. I scrubbed the spot where my mother-in-law had spit until my knees hurt. Physical action helped channel my anxiety into something productive. My lawyer emailed with their formal response to the mediation request. It was beautifully scathing, outlining why they had no legal standing and referencing Tyrone's conviction repeatedly. She'd also begun paperwork for a restraining order based on my documentation. The legal system moved slowly, but at least it was moving. That evening, I ventured out to get groceries again. In the parking lot, I noticed someone had keyed my car. Long scratches ran along the driver's side. I photographed the damage and called the police to file a report. The officer who responded seemed sympathetic, but said without witnesses or cameras, there wasn't much they could do. Back in my apartment, I heard voices in the hallway. Through the peephole, I saw my mother-in-law talking to one of my neighbors, holding a plate of cookies. I couldn't hear the conversation, but my neighbor looked uncomfortable. After my mother-in-law left, I opened my door to find a note taped to it. "Your neighbors know what kind of person you are now." The violation of having her spread lies about me in my own building made my skin crawl. I removed the note and added it to my file. Then I knocked on my neighbor's door. The young woman who answered looked embarrassed. My mother-in-law had told her I was mentally unstable and dangerous. I calmly explained the real situation, showing her the legal documents on my phone. My neighbor was horrified and apologetic. She promised to warn others in the building about my mother-in-law's lies. Word spread quickly through our small community. By the next morning, several neighbors had offered support and promised to watch for Tyrone's parents. At work the next day, Ben pulled me aside. Someone had called claiming to be my doctor, saying I was too mentally ill to work. He'd hung up on them, recognizing it as harassment. He offered to ban anyone who bothered me at the store. I nearly cried at his protectiveness. The afternoon brought a new development. A process server arrived at the bookstore with papers. Tyrone's parents were suing me for defamation, claiming I'd spread lies about their son that damaged their reputation. The lawsuit was clearly frivolous, but it meant more legal fees I couldn't afford. I called my lawyer from the break room, trying not to panic. She assured me the suit would be dismissed quickly, but we'd need to respond. She mentioned legal aid might help with costs, since this was retaliatory harassment. I hung up feeling overwhelmed by the bureaucracy ahead. Jamie found me crying in the break room and sat beside me quietly. When I explained the situation, she mentioned her sister was a paralegal who might help pro bono. The network of support growing around me felt like a lifeline. I wasn't facing this alone anymore. After work, I drove to my mother's house, taking a circuitous route to ensure I wasn't followed. My son ran into my arms and I held him tightly. He showed me his drawings and told me about the books Grandma had been reading to him. For an hour, I could pretend everything was normal. My mother and I talked while my son played. She'd installed new locks and a security system. The police had been driving by regularly. She was scared but determined. We discussed holiday plans, trying to maintain some normalcy for my son. He deserved traditions and stability despite the chaos. Driving home, I noticed a car following me. I took several random turns and it stayed behind me. Instead of going home, I drove to the police station and parked. The car sped away as I walked inside. I filed another report, adding to the paper trail my lawyer said we needed. Back at my apartment, I found a package outside my door. Inside was a photo album filled with pictures of Tyrone as a child, with sticky notes saying things like, "He was innocent once," and "You destroyed our family." I photographed each page before putting it in a box with the other evidence. That night, I video called Sarah while making dinner. She kept me company virtually, making me laugh with stories about her terrible date the night before. Normal friendship felt like rebellion against the fear Tyrone's parents wanted to instill. I refused to let them isolate me completely. My camera system alerted me to movement around midnight. This time, it was both of them. They stood outside my door for nearly an hour, occasionally knocking softly. My mother-in-law held up signs to the camera with messages like, "We forgive you," and "Let us help." I documented everything, fighting the urge to respond. The next morning, exhaustion weighed on me like a physical force. I'd barely slept in days. At work, I made stupid mistakes, mixing up orders and forgetting customer requests. Ben sent me home early, insisting I needed rest. I wanted to protest, but knew he was right. At home, I found an eviction notice taped to my door. My heart stopped until I read it closely. It was fake, designed to look official, but with telltale errors. Another scare tactic. I called my building manager, who confirmed my rent was current and promised to investigate who had access to make such realistic-looking documents. My lawyer called with mixed news. The restraining order hearing was scheduled, but Tyrone's parents had hired a prominent attorney. They were fighting it, claiming they just wanted to reconcile. She warned me to be prepared for character attacks in court. The thought of another legal battle exhausted me. I spent the afternoon organizing all my evidence chronologically. The stack of photos, recordings, and documents had grown thick. Looking at it all together, the pattern of escalation was clear. What had started as misguided anger had become systematic harassment. They weren't going to stop voluntarily. Sarah arrived that evening with Alex and Jamie. They'd organized a support system without my asking. We installed additional cameras to cover my car and the building entrance. Alex taught me basic self-defense moves. Jamie brought information about free legal clinics. Their kindness overwhelmed me. As they prepared to leave, my phone rang with another spoofed number, this time showing as my work. I answered on speaker so everyone could hear. My father-in-law's voice filled the room. "You think your friends can protect you? We have rights. That's our grandchild you're keeping from us." Alex grabbed the phone and responded firmly that all calls were being recorded and traced. He was bluffing about the tracing, but my father-in-law hung up immediately. Having witnesses to the harassment felt validating. I wasn't imagining or exaggerating what was happening to me. After everyone left, I sat in my secured apartment feeling oddly empowered. Yes, I was under siege, but I wasn't helpless. I had documentation, legal support, friends who believed me, and neighbors who watched out for me. So keying her car and fake eviction notices? These two have graduated from the school of bad decisions with honors and making everything worse. Their lawyer must be billing by the hour and loving every terrible choice they make. Tyrone had tried to break me, and now his parents were trying to finish the job, but I was still standing. The night passed peacefully for once. Either my father-in-law was spooked by Alex's threat, or they were planning something new. I managed 6 hours of sleep, the most I'd had all week. I woke feeling clearer and more determined. This couldn't continue indefinitely. Something had to give. At work, I threw myself into customer service with renewed energy. Books had been my escape during the worst times, and now I could help others find their escapes. A regular customer mentioned seeing someone taking photos of the store earlier. The description matched my mother-in-law. I thanked her and made a note. During lunch, I met with the paralegal Jamie had recommended. She reviewed my case and agreed to help pro bono, outraged by the retaliatory lawsuit. She explained how we could countersue for harassment if needed. Having more legal support felt like armor against their attacks. That afternoon, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It was a link to a social media post. Someone had created a fake profile in my name, posting horrible things about Tyrone's family. The posts were designed to make me look unstable and vindictive. I screenshot everything before reporting the profile. My lawyer added this to our evidence for the restraining order. Digital harassment was still harassment. She mentioned their escalation suggested desperation. Their son's conviction was final, and they couldn't accept it. I was the easier target for their anger than accepting what Tyrone had done. After work, I stopped by the police station to update my reports. The officer I'd been working with showed me a map marking all the incidents. The pattern was clear. They were systematically trying to destabilize every aspect of my life. He promised increased patrols near my home and work. At home, I found my mailbox had been glued shut. The building manager had already called a repair service, having noticed it during his rounds. He'd also installed a camera focused on the mailboxes after my reports. Sure enough, the footage showed my father-in-law with a tube of superglue at 3 a.m. I added this vandalism to my ever-growing file. Each incident alone might seem petty, but together they painted a picture of relentless harassment. My lawyer said this would strengthen our case significantly. Judges took patterns of behavior seriously, especially with video evidence. That evening, I called my son for his bedtime. He told me about the fort he'd built with Grandma and the cookies they'd baked. His innocent chatter reminded me what I was protecting. He deserved a life free from this chaos. I promised to see him soon, hoping I could keep that promise. My camera alerted me to movement, but this time it was Mrs. Gerard leaving a covered dish outside my door. A note read, "You need to eat. Stay strong." I retrieved the food gratefully, touched by her kindness. The meal was homemade soup, perfect comfort food for a stressed soul. As I ate, I reviewed my finances. The security upgrades and potential legal fees were draining my savings. I'd need to pick up extra shifts or find a second job soon. The financial pressure added another layer of stress to an already overwhelming situation, but my son's safety was worth any sacrifice. My phone rang with my mother's ringtone. I answered cautiously, ready to hang up if it was spoofed again, but it was really her, using our code word. She'd seen a car parked outside for hours with someone watching her house. She'd called the police, who were on their way. I stayed on the phone with her until the police arrived. They questioned the driver, Tyrone's cousin, the same woman I'd seen at the grocery store. She claimed she was just visiting a friend nearby, but couldn't provide an address. They told her to leave and not return. Another family member drawn into their campaign. Unable to concentrate on anything, I started researching interstate moves. Maybe distance would help, but starting over would mean leaving my support system, my job, my life. Plus, family court might not allow me to take my son out of state. I felt trapped between bad options. Sarah texted to check in, and I sent her a brief update. She reminded me that I'd survived worse than this. Tyrone's actual assault had been the worst night of my life. His parents' harassment was just an echo of his violence, trying to break me where he'd failed. Her perspective helped ground me. I forced myself to do normal things: laundry, dishes, paying bills. Maintaining routine felt like resistance. They wanted to paralyze me with fear, but I kept moving forward. Each small task completed was a tiny victory against their campaign of disruption. My laptop dinged with an email from an unknown address. Against my better judgment, I opened it. It contained dozens of photos of me, at work, at the grocery store, getting in my car, all taken over the past week. The message read, "We see everything. Stop hiding behind lawyers and talk to us." The stalking evidence was actually helpful for our case, though it made my skin crawl. I forwarded everything to my lawyer and the police. The photos were timestamped and showed clear patterns of following me. Their desperation was making them sloppy, creating evidence against themselves. As midnight approached, I prepared for another sleepless night, but the cameras remained quiet. No knocks, no calls, no unexpected visitors. The silence felt ominous rather than peaceful. Were they planning something bigger, or had the increased legal pressure made them reconsider? Morning came with an email from my lawyer. The judge had reviewed our emergency request and granted a temporary restraining order. They would be served today and required to stay 500 feet away from me, my home, and workplace. The relief was overwhelming. It was just paper, but it was something. At work, I felt lighter than I had in days. eyes. Ben noticed immediately and smiled. I explained about the restraining order, and he posted their photos in the back office so all staff would recognize them. The bookstore had become another safe space, protected by people who cared. The afternoon passed peacefully. No strange calls, no unexpected visitors, no feeling of being watched. I actually enjoyed helping customers and lost myself in reorganizing the travel section. Normal life felt possible again, even if just for a few hours. The restraining order gave me false hope. The very next morning, I woke to find my car tires slashed. All 4 of them. The security camera footage showed a figure in dark clothing, face covered, but the build matched my father-in-law. I called the police and filed yet another report. The officer who came out shook his head as he looked at the damage. He mentioned that without clear facial identification, prosecution would be difficult. I had to call in late to work while waiting for the tow truck. Ben understood immediately when I explained. He offered to pick me up, but I'd already arranged a rental car through my insurance. The expense hurt, but I needed mobility. I couldn't let them trap me. At the rental car office, the clerk mentioned someone had called asking about my reservation. They'd claimed to be my spouse needing to cancel it. The clerk had refused without proper identification. I thanked her and made a note to add this to my documentation. Their attempts were getting more creative. Work provided a brief escape from the chaos. I helped a young mother find books for her toddler, and her child's excitement over the colorful pictures reminded me why I needed to stay strong. My son deserved a mother who fought for their safety, not one who crumbled under pressure. During my lunch break, my phone buzzed with a notification from my bank. Someone had attempted to access my account from an unknown device. I immediately called the bank and confirmed it wasn't me. They locked the account and issued new cards. The representative mentioned the attempt came from a local IP address. I spent the rest of my break changing all my passwords and enabling 2-factor authentication on everything. My hands shook as I realized how many ways they were trying to destabilize my life. Financial harassment added a new layer to their campaign. After work, I drove to pick up my new bank cards. In the parking lot, I noticed Tyrone's cousin sitting in her car, watching the bank entrance. I took photos of her and her license plate, then went inside through a different door. When I came out, she was gone, but I knew she'd been tracking my movements. Back at my apartment, I found my mailbox had been filled with sand. The building manager was already there with maintenance, having seen it on the cameras. He showed me footage of my mother-in-law pouring it in around 4 a.m. She'd worn the same dark clothing as the figure who'd slashed my tires. I helped clean out the mailbox while the manager called a locksmith to install a more secure version. He mentioned other residents had complained about strange people asking questions about me. The building community had rallied to protect one of their own. That evening, Sarah came over with groceries. She'd worried I wasn't eating properly with all the stress. We cooked together, and the normal activity of chopping vegetables and stirring pots felt therapeutic. She stayed until late, making sure I ate a full meal. After she left, I reviewed my finances again. The car repairs, new security measures, and lost wages from missing work were adding up. I'd need to dip into my emergency fund soon. I started looking for weekend work I could do from home to supplement my income. My laptop dinged with an email from my son's school. Someone had called claiming to be me, trying to change the pickup authorization list. The school had followed protocol and refused without in-person verification. I replied thanking them for their vigilance and confirming no changes should be made. Sleep came in fragments that night. I'm really interested in how they keep trying different ways to get to her. First the tires, then the bank account, now trying to mess with her son's school pickup list. Every time I dozed off, I'd jolt awake thinking I heard something. The cameras showed nothing unusual, but the psychological toll was mounting. I knew that was part of their strategy. Exhaust me until I made mistakes. The next morning, I found a manila envelope tucked under my windshield wiper. Inside were printed screenshots of the fake social media posts, along with a handwritten note. Everyone will see who you really are. I photographed everything before driving to the police station to add it to my file. At work, Ben pulled me aside. He'd noticed someone sitting in the cafe next door for hours, watching our store. The description matched my father-in-law. Ben had already asked mall security to keep an eye on the situation. I felt grateful for his protective instincts. During a quiet moment, I helped an elderly customer find books about healing from trauma. She mentioned her own daughter had gone through something similar. Her quiet words of encouragement meant more than she could know. Survivors recognized each other. My phone rang with my lawyer's number. The restraining order hearing was tomorrow. She wanted to review my testimony and make sure I had all my documentation organized. We spent an hour on the phone going through everything. She sounded confident but warned me they'd hired an aggressive attorney. After work, I drove to my mother's house, taking an indirect route as always. My son was building with blocks when I arrived. He showed me his tower, proud of how tall he'd made it. I helped him add more blocks, treasuring these normal moments amid the chaos. My mother pulled me aside while my son played. She'd noticed someone had been going through her trash. She'd found the bags torn open and contents scattered. We both knew they were looking for information about me or my son. She'd started burning any papers with personal information. The drive home felt heavier than usual. I stopped at a red light and noticed a car pull up beside me. My mother-in-law was in the passenger seat staring at me. She held up her phone, clearly taking photos. I kept my eyes forward until the light changed, then took several random turns to lose them. At my apartment, Mrs. Gerard was waiting by my door with another covered dish. She mentioned seeing strangers in the building again. Her description matched some of Tyrone's extended family. The network of people trying to break me seemed to be growing. I spent the evening preparing for court. I organized my evidence chronologically, printed copies of everything, and practiced staying calm while recounting the harassment. My hands shook as I looked at the stack of documentation. 3 weeks of their campaign had generated inches of paper. Jamie called to wish me luck for tomorrow. She mentioned her sister would be there as support. I nearly cried at the gesture. Having people in my corner made facing his parents feel less daunting. I wasn't walking into that courtroom alone. That night, I actually managed 5 hours of uninterrupted sleep. Maybe exhaustion finally won, or maybe knowing the court date was tomorrow gave me hope that this might end. I woke feeling more centered than I had in weeks. I dressed carefully for court, choosing clothes that made me feel confident but not aggressive. Professional, but approachable. I double-checked my documentation folder and left early, not wanting to risk being late if they tried any last-minute interference. At the courthouse, I saw them immediately. They sat with their lawyer, heads together in discussion. My father-in-law glared when he saw me, but my mother-in-law looked away. I found my lawyer and we reviewed last-minute details. She reminded me to stay calm and stick to facts. The hearing itself was a blur of testimony and evidence presentation. I showed the judge photos, videos, documentation of every incident. Their lawyer tried to paint me as paranoid and vindictive, but the evidence spoke louder than his words. The judge reviewed everything carefully. When their lawyer argued they just wanted to reconcile for their grandson's sake, the judge cut him off. She'd seen the videos of them at my door at midnight. She'd read the threatening notes. She'd reviewed the pattern of escalation. Her expression grew sterner with each piece of evidence. The judge granted the permanent restraining order with strict conditions. They were to have no contact with me, my son, or my mother. They couldn't come within 500 feet of our homes, my workplace, or my son's school. Any violation would result in immediate arrest. I watched their faces as the judge read the order. My father-in-law's jaw clenched with rage. My mother-in-law started crying. Their expensive lawyer gathered his papers quickly, clearly frustrated by the loss. They left without looking at me, but I knew this wasn't over. Outside the courthouse, my lawyer warned me to stay vigilant. The order was just paper unless they violated it. She advised me to keep documenting everything and call police immediately if they appeared. We scheduled a follow-up to discuss the defamation lawsuit, which she expected would be dropped now. I sat in my car for several minutes, processing what had happened. The legal system had validated my experience. The harassment was real, documented, and now officially prohibited. But I knew paper wouldn't stop someone determined to hurt me. My phone buzzed with messages from Sarah, Jamie, and my mother. Word had already spread about the victory. I responded briefly to each, then drove to work. I needed normalcy, the routine of books and customers and coffee smell from next door. Ben had decorated my workspace with a small congratulations sign. He'd heard from Jamie about the court victory. I felt embarrassed by the attention, but touched by the gesture. My coworkers had become another layer of protection around me. The afternoon passed peacefully. No strange customers, no feeling of being watched, no threatening calls. I actually enjoyed recommending books and helping with inventory. For a few hours, I could pretend life was normal again. After work, I drove straight home, no longer needing to take circuitous routes. The restraining order meant they couldn't follow me legally. Of course, legality hadn't stopped them before, but I felt slightly safer knowing violations would have immediate consequences. In my apartment building's parking lot, I saw a police cruiser. My heart raced until I realized they were there for someone else. The officer nodded at me as I passed, and I realized the building manager must have shared my situation, another layer of protection. Inside, I found a letter from my lawyer. The defamation lawsuit had indeed been withdrawn. Their lawyer had filed the paperwork that morning, probably after realizing how badly the restraining order hearing had gone. One less legal battle to fight. I called my mother to share the news. She cried with relief. We made plans for me to see my son tomorrow. It had been too long since I'd spent real time with him. She mentioned the police patrols had increased, and no one had been lurking around. That evening, I cooked a real meal for the first time in weeks. Not takeout or frozen dinners, but actual food I prepared myself. The simple act of cooking felt like reclaiming my life. I ate at my table instead of standing at the counter. Sarah arrived with wine to celebrate. We sat on my couch, the same one Tyrone's parents had contaminated with their presence weeks ago. Now it was mine again, a place where friends could gather. We talked about everything except the case, focusing on her work, dating life, normal things. After she left, I did something I hadn't in weeks. I took a long bath. Not a quick shower with one ear listening for danger, but an actual bath with bubbles and music. The hot water soaked away layers of tension I'd been carrying. My phone remained quiet all evening. No spoofed calls, no threatening texts, no harassment. The silence felt foreign after weeks of constant intrusion. I kept checking it, sure something must be wrong, but nothing came. Before bed, I checked the camera footage from the day. Empty hallways, normal neighbors coming and going, no sign of Tyrone's family. The ordinary footage felt extraordinary after weeks of capturing their harassment. I slept deeply that night, waking only once from habit. The apartment felt different, lighter somehow. The restraining order had shifted something fundamental. They could no longer terrorize me without consequence. The law had finally given me a shield. Morning arrived with sunlight streaming through my windows. I'd forgotten to close the curtains, something I'd never have done during the harassment. I made coffee and sat by the window, watching normal life pass by below. A new day without fear. I arrived at work early, eager to throw myself into inventory. Ben had left a note about new shipments arriving. I spent the morning cataloging books, losing myself in titles and ISBN numbers. The routine felt meditative after weeks of chaos. A regular customer mentioned how much better I looked. She said I seemed lighter, more like myself. I realized the stress had been visible to everyone. The weight of constant fear had shown in my posture, my face, my interactions. During lunch, I sat outside for the first time in weeks. The sun felt warm on my face as I ate my sandwich. No scanning for threats, no checking over my shoulder. Just a woman eating lunch on a bench, gloriously ordinary. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. She'd sent a video of my son singing a song he'd learned. His voice, off-key and enthusiastic, made me smile genuinely. Tomorrow, I'd hear it in person. The thought filled me with anticipation instead of dread. The afternoon brought a surprise. Mrs. Gerard appeared at the bookstore with her granddaughter. She wanted to thank me, she said. My situation had prompted the building to upgrade security, making everyone safer. Her granddaughter shyly handed me a handmade card. I helped them find picture books, watching the little girl's face light up at the illustrations. The restraining order really worked like magic. These two went from midnight door pounders to completely invisible in one court ruling. Their fancy lawyer probably charged them big money just to watch the judge shut down their whole stalking operation with actual video proof. This was why I worked here, for moments of simple joy. Mrs. Gerard squeezed my hand before leaving, a wordless acknowledgement of shared survival. Ben asked if I wanted to adjust my schedule back to normal. I'd been avoiding closing shifts, but now felt ready to return to my regular hours. The restraining order had given me permission to reclaim all aspects of my life life. The rest of my shift passed in pleasant monotony. I reorganized displays, helped customers, processed returns. Each normal task felt like a small victory. I was more than what had been done to me. I was a person with a job, friends, a life worth living. After work, I stopped at the grocery store without fear. I took my time selecting produce, comparing prices, reading labels. No rushing, no constant vigilance. An elderly man accidentally bumped my cart and apologized. I smiled and said it was fine, meaning it. At home, I found only normal mail in my newly secured mailbox. Bills, advertisements, a postcard from an old college friend. I sorted through it at my kitchen table. Another ordinary task that felt extraordinary after weeks of dreading what I might find. I called my son for his bedtime. He told me about playing with Grandma and the cookies they'd baked. He asked when I was coming to see him. Tomorrow, I promised. Tomorrow we'd spend the whole day together. He cheered, and the sound healed something inside me. That night, I sat with my laptop and wrote. Not documentation of harassment, but thoughts about healing. About the community that had formed around me. About the strength I'd found in unexpected places. The words flowed easily, no longer stuck behind fear. I prepared for bed with deliberate care. Tomorrow would be a full day with my son, and I wanted to be rested. As I lay down, I realized I hadn't checked the cameras in hours. The need for constant vigilance was fading. Safety was becoming normal again. The next morning dawned bright and clear. I dressed in comfortable clothes, packed snacks and activities for my son. The drive to my mother's house felt different. I played music, windows cracked open, spring air flowing through the car. My son met me at the door, bouncing with excitement. He'd been waiting by the window, my mother said. I scooped him up, holding him close, breathing in his little boy smell of soap and energy. He chattered about everything I'd missed. We spent the morning at the park. He showed me how high he could swing, how fast he could run. I pushed him on the swings, helped him climb, caught him at the bottom of the slide. Other parents nodded in recognition, just another mom playing with her child. Lunch was picnic style on a blanket. He'd helped pack the sandwiches, proud of his contribution. We ate and talked about his drawings, his friends, his favorite books. Normal conversation with my extraordinary boy. No mention of why I'd been away. The afternoon included building forts in Grandma's living room. We used every cushion and blanket, creating elaborate structures. He directed the construction with serious concentration. When it was complete, we sat inside reading stories until he dozed off against my shoulder. My mother and I talked quietly while he napped. The restraining order had eased her fears too. She'd been researching summer programs for him, planning for a future that felt possible again. We discussed schedules, pickup times, normal parenting logistics. As evening approached, I had to leave. My son protested sleepily, but I promised to return soon, and meant it. The fear that had kept me away was manageable now. I could be his mother fully again, not just in stolen moments. The drive home felt peaceful. I'd spent an entire day focused on my son, not on threats or harassment. The restraining order had given me space to breathe, to remember who I was beyond a victim. I was a mother, a survivor, a person rebuilding. At my apartment, everything remained quiet. No signs of intrusion, no threatening messages. I made dinner and ate while video chatting with Sarah. She was planning a girls' night next week, assuming I felt comfortable. I said yes immediately. I spent the evening doing normal things. Laundry, paying bills, reading for pleasure. Each mundane task felt like reclaiming territory. My life wasn't about documenting harassment anymore. It was about living, healing, moving forward. Before bed, I looked through the photos from today. My son's smiling face in dozens of shots. His joy was untainted by the adult drama surrounding him. I'd protected that innocence, and would continue to do so. That was my real victory. I checked the cameras once before bed. Empty hallways, quiet building. The ordinary footage that had once seemed impossible now felt routine. I saved the files and closed the laptop. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but tonight I could rest. My phone charged silently on the nightstand. No calls to dread, no texts to fear. The restraining order wasn't perfect protection, but it had shifted the power dynamic. They could no longer invade my life without consequence. The law had finally chosen my side. I lay in bed thinking about the future. My son would start school soon. I'd continue working toward my degree. Life would move forward, no longer frozen by fear. The damage Tyrone had done, that his parents had tried to compound, was healing. Recovery wasn't linear. There would be bad days, triggers, setbacks, but I'd built a support system stronger than their harassment. Friends, neighbors, co-workers, even strangers had shown me kindness. I wasn't alone in this fight. The apartment felt like home again. Not a fortress or a prison, but a sanctuary I'd defended and reclaimed. Every room held memories of their invasion, but also of my resistance. I'd refused to be driven out or broken down. Tomorrow, I'd return to work, see my son again, live my life. The restraining order had given me legal protection, but I'd given myself something more valuable. The knowledge that I could survive their worst and remain standing. Sleep came easily, deep and dreamless. No jumping at sounds, no constant vigilance. Just rest, preparing for another ordinary day. The most extraordinary gift after weeks of chaos. Peace, earned through persistence and the support of people who'd refused to let me face this alone. What a ride, huh? Thanks for exploring all of life's weird little mysteries with me. Always love sharing these moments with you. Catch you next time. Like the video. It helps more than you think.